I believed that Thanksgiving that year would be different. I truly did. After 3 years of marriage, 3 years of swallowing discomfort and explaining away small humiliations, I told myself that maybe this time I would finally be seen. After all, I was legally his wife. I had done everything a good daughter-in-law was supposed to do. I had given patience, effort, silence. Surely on a holiday meant to celebrate gratitude, I would at least be allowed to sit at the table. I was wrong. My mother-in-law's house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood, large and immaculate, the kind of place that looked warm and welcoming from the outside. Inside, the dining table stretched long enough to seat 12 people comfortably. The smell of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce filled the air, heavy and rich, exactly like the Thanksgiving scenes shown on television. But my chest felt tight the moment I stepped into the kitchen. "Take those plates to the table," my mother-in-law said sharply, without even looking at me. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was casual, as if this was simply my role. I paused for half a second. Should I wait and set everything together later? I asked, carefully keeping my voice soft. She finally turned her head and looked at me from head to toe, her eyes cold and assessing. "My son will be home any minute. I don't want an empty table." Not we, not the family, my son. I said nothing and did as I was told. I placed each plate, carefully lining up forks and knives, folding napkins the way she liked. That was when I noticed it. 11 place settings. Only 11. My stomach tightened, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she miscounted. Maybe there was another chair somewhere. I had learned to give her the benefit of the doubt, even when my instincts warned me otherwise. Daniel walked in soon after, smiling, relaxed, already comfortable in his childhood home. He hugged his mother, asked how she was, and then glanced at me briefly. "Can you help my mom a bit?" he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I searched his face for something. Confusion, awareness, even mild discomfort. There was nothing, just expectation. Family members began to arrive one by one. His sister, her husband, a couple of cousins, and uncle. The house filled with laughter and conversation. I stayed in the kitchen, stirring gravy, checking the oven, carrying trays back and forth. No one asked if I needed a break. No one asked if I was joining them. When the food was ready, I carried the turkey to the dining room. As everyone began taking their seats, my mother-in-law spoke loudly, her voice clear and firm. "Just stand there for now. You'll need to refill drinks." I froze. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Not out of shock, but out of acceptance. No one questioned her. No one protested. It was as if I had simply been assigned my place. I stood behind the chairs as they began eating. I poured water, passed bread, collected empty plates. Each time I moved around the table, I heard laughter, stories, cheerful Happy Thanksgiving wishes exchanged freely among them. None were directed at me. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask, my voice barely audible, "Am I not eating with everyone?" She glanced at me and shrugged. "You can eat later. Right now, you should be helping the family." I looked at Daniel. He was laughing at something his brother-in-law said, avoiding my eyes completely. I waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. My hands trembled slightly as I refilled a glass of wine. I felt heat rush to my face, not from the kitchen, but from the humiliation sinking into my bones. Halfway through the meal, my mother-in-law spoke again, her tone conversational, almost instructional. "A daughter-in-law who doesn't know her place won't last long. A woman should understand her position." The table went quiet for a few seconds. Then slowly, conversation resumed. Someone reached for more potatoes. Someone laughed. Life went on. Something inside me broke at that moment. Not loudly, not violently. It was a clean, precise break, like a thread being cut. I realized then that I was not her daughter-in-law. I was not a guest. I was not even family. I was useful, convenient, replaceable. I thought about the past 3 years, the excuses I made, the times I told myself I was too sensitive, the way I convinced myself that patience would eventually earn respect. It wouldn't. I wasn't sensitive, I was being erased. As I carried the last dish back into the kitchen, I stopped at the sink and looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a woman standing straight, wearing an apron, her eyes clear in a way they hadn't been before. I spoke to myself silently but firmly. This will be the last Thanksgiving where I stand while others sit. They didn't know it yet. None of them did. But from that moment on, everything had shifted. That dinner wasn't just humiliation. It was the beginning of something they would never see coming. That night, I did not cry. I lay awake in the guest bedroom Daniel and I used whenever we stayed at his mother's house, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me. The house was quiet now. the kind of quiet that comes after laughter has burned itself out and everyone believes the day ended well. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. From the hallway, I could hear faint voices. My mother-in-law speaking softly, confidently. Daniel responding in low, familiar tones. They were comfortable, unbothered. Whatever had happened at dinner had already been filed away as normal. That realization hurt more than the humiliation itself. At some point, Daniel slipped into the room. The mattress dipped slightly as he lay down beside me. He smelled like wine and turkey and the house he grew up in. "You okay?" he asked casually, already turning onto his side. The question came too late. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, long enough that he sighed. "You're upset about dinner, aren't you?" I turned toward him. I wasn't allowed to sit. He exhaled, clearly annoyed. "My mom didn't mean anything by it. She told me to stand," I said, "in front of everyone." "She just expects help," he replied. "That's how she is." I stared at him in the dark, trying to understand how easily he had explained it away. "Did you notice there wasn't a chair for me?" There was a pause, just long enough. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. Something inside my chest went hollow. "I'm your wife," I said quietly. "And you are overreacting," he replied. "It's one dinner." One dinner? That phrase settled heavily between us. Because it wasn't one dinner. It was every small moment that led up to it. Every time his mother corrected me in front of others. Every time he told me to ignore it. Every time I adjusted myself to fit into a space that clearly didn't want me. I turned away from him. He didn't try to touch me again. The next morning, Thanksgiving sunlight filled the kitchen as if nothing had happened. My mother-in-law was already dressed, sipping coffee at the table. "Good morning," she said briskly, not looking up. I replied out of habit. Daniel joined her a few minutes later. They discussed plans for the day, Aaron's leftovers football. I stood at the counter, rinsing cups invisible again. Before we left, she turned to me. "Next time you should be more prepared. Holidays are about family, not feelings." I nodded. Not because I agreed, because I was done explaining. On the drive home, Daniel hummed along to the radio. I watched the scenery pass by the trees, blurring together my reflection faint in the window. "Don't make this a big thing," he said eventually. "You know how my mom is." "Yes," I replied, "I do." That night, once we were back in our own apartment, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower, letting the water run hot, not because I needed it, but because I needed the sound. I finally let myself feel it then. Not rage. Clarity. I replayed the scene over and over, not to punish myself, but to understand it fully. The missing chair, the command to stand, the silence from everyone else, the ease with which Daniel dismissed it. It wasn't accidental. It was a message, and it wasn't meant just for me. It was meant to teach me where I stood. The following week, life resumed its usual rhythm. Work, groceries, small talk. Daniel acted as if nothing had changed. He was affectionate in familiar ways, but distant when I brought up anything uncomfortable. One evening, while folding laundry, I asked him, "If it were your sister standing during dinner, would you have said something?" He didn't answer right away. "That's different," he said finally. "How?" I asked. "She's family," he replied. The word landed like a verdict. I stopped folding. "So am I," I said. He shrugged. "You're married into it." That night I opened my laptop and started writing. Not angrily, not emotionally, just facts. Dates, comments, moments. Things that once felt small but now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I didn't know why I was documenting it yet. I only knew that for the first time I was listening to myself instead of silencing the discomfort. A few days later, my mother-in-law called. "I expect you to host Christmas this year," she said. "It's time you show you can handle responsibility." I held the phone tightly. "And if I don't?" She laughed softly. "Then we'll see how committed you really are to this family." After the call ended, I sat very still. Thanksgiving hadn't been the problem. It had been the warning. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They thought standing meant submission. They thought I would continue to shrink to keep the peace. They were wrong. I didn't confront anyone yet. I didn't argue. I didn't announce boundaries. I did something quieter. I began preparing. Because when someone teaches you your place, they never expect you to choose a new one. And when I finally sat down again, it would not be at their table. It would be on my own terms. The shift didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as normalcy. After Thanksgiving, Daniel became oddly attentive in small, performative ways. He brought home my favorite takeout, asked about my day, wrapped an arm around me on the couch like he was checking off a task. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a husband trying to smooth things over. But something had changed in me. I noticed how every kindness arrived only after tension, How affection was offered not because he understood, but because he wanted the discomfort gone. It wasn't love, it was maintenance. A week after Thanksgiving, his mother invited us to lunch. "I want to clear the air," she said over the phone, her voice sweetened just enough to sound reasonable. "We're family. We shouldn't hold grudges." Daniel looked relieved when I agreed to go. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped like a problem had solved itself. The restaurant was upscale but understated. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of place where conflict is meant to stay quiet. My mother-in-law arrived first. She hugged Daniel warmly, then turned to me and offered a polite smile that never reached her eyes. We sat. This time there were enough chairs. That detail almost made me laugh. I felt terrible after Thanksgiving. She began folding her napkin neatly on her lap. "I hope you didn't take anything personally." I met her gaze. "I was told to stand through the entire dinner." She waved a hand dismissively. "You young women are very sensitive these days." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom didn't mean it that way," he said quickly. She nodded. "Exactly. I was teaching you, preparing you." "For what?" I asked. "For marriage," she replied. "For family life. A wife supports. She doesn't compete." There it was. Not cruelty, philosophy. I leaned back slightly. Compete for what? She smiled. Attention, authority, respect. Daniel laughed awkwardly. "She just has strong opinions." I do, his mother agreed. "And experience. I've been a wife for 40 years. I know what lasts." I looked at Daniel then, really looked. He was nodding. Not vigorously, not eagerly, but enough. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't just about his mother. It never had been. After lunch, Daniel squeezed my hand in the car. "See?" She was trying to explain herself. She explained exactly what she believes, I replied. And he asked, "And you agree with her?" I said. He frowned. "I just think you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I stared out the window. That's what people say when something doesn't hurt them. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about the early days of our relationship. How charming his family had seemed, how proud he was of their traditions, how often he spoke about loyalty, sacrifice, doing what's expected. I had mistaken that for stability. It was hierarchy. Over the next few weeks, the pattern sharpened. Daniel began making small decisions without consulting me, committing us to weekend plans with his family, volunteering me to help with events, telling people she doesn't mind before I'd said anything. When I objected, he looked genuinely confused. "Why are you suddenly so difficult?" he asked one evening. "I'm not difficult," I replied. "I'm present." He didn't like that answer. Christmas preparations intensified the pressure. His mother called daily. Lists, expectations, instructions. She spoke to me like a project manager reviewing an underperforming employee. "You'll cook the sides," she said. "I'll handle the main dish." "And if I don't?" I asked calmly. There was a pause, then laughter. "Don't be dramatic." Daniel later told me I should just let it go. It's important to her. "What's important to me?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. One night alone in our bedroom, I opened my notebook again. The one I had started after Thanksgiving. I wrote down everything. Not emotionally, precisely. Who said what, when, who stayed silent, who benefited. I noticed something disturbing. Whenever I complied, the demands increased. Whenever I resisted, I was labeled emotional. Whenever Daniel felt tension, it was my responsibility to fix it. I wasn't a wife in their system. I was a buffer. Between his mother's authority and his comfort. Between tradition and progress. Between control and peace. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A few days before Christmas, Daniel came home late. He was unusually serious. "My mom thinks you've been distant," he said. "I have," I replied. "She feels disrespected," he continued. I closed my laptop slowly. "She disrespected me first." "That's different," he said automatically. "How?" I asked. "She's my mother." "And I'm your wife." He rubbed his face. "Why does everything have to be a confrontation?" "It doesn't," I said. "It just has to be honest." He sat down across from me. "So what do you want?" The question hung between us. I realized then that no one had ever asked me that in this family. Not sincerely. I answered carefully. "I want to be treated like an equal." He stared at me. "That's not how my family works." I nodded slowly. That was the moment the truth became unavoidable. I wasn't failing to fit into his family. I was refusing to disappear inside it. And that refusal I knew would cost me something. But for the first time, I was certain of this. Standing had never been the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that sitting down might mean standing up to everyone who benefited from me staying quiet. And I was no longer willing to pretend I didn't see the cost. The first time I said no, it didn't sound brave. It sounded quiet, careful, almost polite. Daniel's mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice brisk and efficient as always. She didn't ask how I was. She never did. "I finalized Christmas plans," she said. "You'll come early to help prep. We'll need you by 10 in the morning." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at the wall. In the past, I would have agreed automatically, already calculating what time I'd need to wake up, what dish I'd be responsible for, how to stay out of her way, while doing exactly what she wanted. This time something stopped me. "I won't be coming early," I said. There was a brief silence, sharp and startled. What she asked. "I'll come when Daniel comes," I continued evenly. "And I'll sit with everyone." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not how we do things," she replied. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm saying it now." Her voice cooled. "You're making things difficult for no reason." "For a reason," I corrected gently. She hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking when I put the phone down, not because I regretted what I'd said, but because I knew exactly what would come next. Daniel came home that evening already irritated. "What did you say to my mom?" he asked, dropping his keys onto the counter a little too hard. "I told her I wouldn't be arriving early to work in the kitchen," I replied. He stared at me. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not staff," I said. He laughed once, incredulous. "You're acting like she asked you to do something outrageous." "She asked me to stand during Thanksgiving dinner," I replied calmly. "That was outrageous." "That was weeks ago," he said. "Why are you still on that?" "Because nothing changed," I answered, except me. His expression hardened. "You're embarrassing me." The words landed cleanly. "Not you're hurting, not you're upset. Embarrassing." "I'm protecting myself," I said. He shook his head. "You're creating a problem where there doesn't need to be one." I looked at him, then really looked, and felt something shift again. "This problem already exists," I said. "You just don't experience it." He didn't respond. He went into the bedroom and closed the door. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because I was banished, but because I didn't want to share space with someone who saw my dignity as an inconvenience. The next few days were tense. His mother didn't call again. Instead, messages started coming from other directions. His sister texted me, "Why are you upsetting Mom before Christmas?" An aunt sent a passive message about family harmony. Even Daniel's cousin, someone I barely spoke to, commented under one of my social media posts, "Holidays are about compromise." Compromise. I stared at the word, feeling something dark and familiar twist in my chest. They weren't asking for compromise. They were asking for compliance. On Friday evening, Daniel tried a new approach. "I talked to my mom," he said carefully. "She's willing to let you sit this time." "Let. As long as you help first," he added quickly. "That's fair, right?" I felt my chest tighten, "so I earn a chair." He frowned. "Why do you have to put it like that?" "Because that's exactly what it is," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "You're going to ruin Christmas." I stood up slowly. "No," I said. "I'm just refusing to ruin myself." That was the first time he looked genuinely unsure. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I won't be treated like this anymore," I replied. "Not by your mother, and not with your help." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "So what happens now?" I didn't answer immediately, because that question wasn't just about Christmas. It was about everything. The following week, I started making changes he didn't notice at first. I stopped volunteering for family events. I stopped explaining my feelings in long, careful paragraphs. I stopped softening my words to protect everyone else's comfort. Instead, I observed, I watched how quickly warmth disappeared when I set a boundary, how affection was replaced by irritation, how respect had always been conditional. One night, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't plan to look. I wasn't suspicious. I was just tired. The screen lit up with a message from his mother. "She's becoming a problem. You need to handle it before it gets worse." I felt cold all over, not because of the message itself, but because of how calmly it was written. This wasn't new. This was strategy. Later that night, Daniel mentioned casually, "My mom thinks therapy might help you." "Help me do what I asked." "Be less reactive," he replied. I nodded slowly. "And does she think therapy might help you stand up for your wife?" He didn't answer. That was when the final piece settled into place. This wasn't about me fitting in. It was about me being controlled. And the moment I refused that role, I became the threat. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked calmer than I felt. Clearer. "I see it now," I whispered to my reflection. Christmas was days away. They thought I was bluffing. They thought this was a phase. They thought pressure would fold me back into place. They had no idea that Thanksgiving wasn't the start of my rebellion. It was the end of my silence, and I was done negotiating my humanity for a seat at a table that never intended to welcome me. Christmas arrived wrapped in politeness. That was the most dangerous part of it. The morning of Christmas Eve, Daniel acted almost cheerful. He made coffee, asked if I'd slept well, kissed my cheek before checking his phone. Anyone watching would have assumed the tension had passed, that whatever disagreement we'd been circling had dissolved into something manageable. It hadn't. It had simply gone underground. "We'll leave around 11, he said casually. "That gives us time to help Mom before everyone else arrives." "I told her I'm not coming early," I replied. He paused Mug halfway to his mouth. "She said you agreed." "No," I said. "She said she expected it." He sighed. "Why do you insist on making this difficult?" I didn't raise my voice. "Why do you insist on pretending it isn't—" The drive to his mother's house was quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. Daniel tapped the steering wheel lightly, a habit he had when he was annoyed but trying to look calm. "You could just apologize," he said finally. "It would smooth everything over." "For what?" I asked. "For how you've been acting," he replied. "Cold, distant." I looked straight ahead. "Boundaries feel cold to people who benefit from you having none." He scoffed. "You've been reading too much online." "No," I said. "I've been paying attention." When we arrived, the house was already buzzing. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter spilled out from the open front door. His mother greeted Daniel warmly, hugging him, kissing his cheek. She turned to me and smiled, not warmly, politely. "You made it," she said. "I did," I replied. She gestured toward the kitchen. "We're just finishing up." I didn't move. "I'll say hello to everyone first," I said. Her smile tightened. "There's work to be done." "And I'll help when I choose to," I said calmly, "after I greet the family." The air shifted. Daniel cleared his throat. "Maybe just help a little first." I looked at him. "I'm not doing this." His mother laughed softly, a sound that carried no humor. "You've changed," she said. Yes, I agreed, I have. That was when she stopped pretending. "You think marriage makes you equal here?" she said quietly, stepping closer. "It doesn't." Daniel stiffened. "Mom," she waved him off. "I'm speaking to her." I felt strangely calm. "Then say it clearly." She met my eyes. "In this family, respect is earned. You don't get it by challenging authority." I nodded. "Then I don't belong in this system?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You belong where my son belongs." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Can we not do this today?" I turned to him. "This has been happening every day. Today is just the first time I'm not pretending." We walked into the living room. Everyone turned to look at us. Conversations paused. Something was wrong and they could feel it. Dinner was announced shortly after. This time there was a chair for me, placed at the end of the table, not beside Daniel, not among the others. At the edge, I stood there looking at it. Daniel whispered, "Just sit." I didn't. "Is there a reason my seat is separate?" I asked, my voice steady. The room went silent. His mother answered easily. "That's where there was space." I scanned the table. There were 2 empty chairs beside Daniel. "I'll sit there," I said, pulling one out. She stepped forward. "No." The word echoed. Daniel froze. I looked at him. "Are you going to say something?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Can we just eat?" That was my answer. I placed the chair back where it was and picked up my coat. "I'm leaving," I said. Gasps rippled through the room. "You're embarrassing us," his mother snapped. I looked at her calmly. "You embarrassed me first," repeatedly. Daniel followed me to the door. "You're overreacting. Please don't do this." "I'm finally reacting appropriately," I said. I stepped outside into the cold air, my breath visible, my hands steady. He didn't follow me further. I drove home alone. That night, sitting in silence, something settled fully into place. Thanksgiving hadn't been an accident. Christmas wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system, and I was expected to break myself to fit inside it. Daniel came home late. He didn't apologize. "My mom is devastated," he said. I looked at him. "So am I." "She thinks you owe her respect," he continued. "I owe myself safety," I replied. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "So what are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "I'm saying this marriage cannot continue like this." He laughed short and disbelieving. "You're threatening to leave over a chair." "No," I said. "Over what the chair represents." He went quiet. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about holidays anymore. It was about power. And the moment I refused to sit where I was told everything they had built around my silence began to crack. They thought Christmas would put me back in my place. Instead, it showed me exactly where I stood and why I could no longer stay. The days after Christmas felt unreal, like I was living inside someone else's life. Daniel and I moved around each other carefully, politely, like co-workers sharing an office after a failed project. He slept later than usual. I woke earlier. Our conversations were limited to logistics, groceries, bills, work schedules. Nothing that required honesty. Nothing that risked truth. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded. Every quiet moment carried the same unspoken question: who was going to break first? It wasn't me. On the 3rd day after Christmas, Daniel finally said it out loud. "You really humiliated my family," he said, standing in the kitchen, arms crossed. I was rinsing a mug. I didn't turn around. "Your family humiliated me for years." "That's not fair," he replied. "They welcomed you." I turned off the faucet slowly. They tolerated me when I was useful. He shook his head. You're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm finally reading it accurately. He let out a frustrated breath. You could have handled it differently. I did, I replied, for 3 years. That was when his tone changed. You know, he said more quietly, my mom thinks you've been trying to pull me away from my family. I looked at him then. Do you believe that? He didn't answer right away. I think, he said slowly, you want things to revolve around you. The words hit harder than I expected. Do you hear yourself? I asked. He shrugged. You're the one making ultimatums. I didn't make an ultimatum, I said. I made a boundary. He scoffed. Same thing. That was when I realized how deeply incompatible our definitions of love had become. To him, love meant alignment, obedience, blending into the structure that already existed. To me, love meant safety, mutual respect, being able to sit at a table without earning the right. That night, I opened my laptop again. I didn't write about his mother this time. I wrote about Daniel, about the way he deflected, the way he minimized, the way he framed my pain as inconvenience, the way he used phrases like, that's just how she is, and you're taking it too personally. I saw the pattern clearly now. He didn't protect me because protecting me would have required disappointing her, and he had chosen long ago who he would never disappoint. A few days later, he told me he was going to stay at his mother's house for a bit. I think space will help, he said. For who, I asked. For both of us, he replied, though his eyes avoided mine. He packed a small bag, not enough for a real separation, just enough to signal control, to remind me that he could leave without actually leaving. Before he walked out, he said something that stayed with me. I didn't marry you to fight my family. I nodded. I didn't marry you to disappear in it. The door closed softly behind him. The apartment felt different immediately, not lonelier, quieter in a way that felt clean. That first night alone, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. In the days that followed, I noticed small things. I ate when I was hungry, not when it was convenient. I spoke out loud to myself without fear of being overheard. I rearranged furniture without asking if it was okay. Each small act felt like oxygen. Daniel texted occasionally. Neutral messages. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. I responded politely, briefly. Then his mother texted. I didn't have her number saved anymore, but I recognized it instantly. You need to stop this. You're hurting my son. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed back. I am protecting myself. Her reply came quickly. Marriage requires sacrifice. I set the phone down without responding. Later that evening, Daniel called. She's really upset, he said. I'm sure, I replied. She doesn't understand why you're doing this. I do, I said. There was a long pause. So what now? I took a breath. Now we decide if this marriage includes me as an equal. He laughed softly, nervously. You keep saying that word. Because I've never had it here, I replied. Silence again. A week later, Daniel came back to the apartment. He looked tired, less certain. We need to talk, he said. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. My mom thinks therapy would help, he began. For me, I asked. For us, he corrected quickly, but mostly for how you respond to things. I felt something in me go still. So the problem, I said slowly, is my reaction to being disrespected. He rubbed his temples. I just want peace. So do I said. But not at the cost of myself. He leaned back frustrated. You're asking me to choose. No, I said, I'm asking you to show me you already have. The truth landed between us heavy and unavoidable. He didn't deny it. That was the loudest answer of all. That night after he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room and made a decision I hadn't planned to make so soon. I wasn't going to beg to be chosen. I wasn't going to compete with a system designed to keep me small. And I wasn't going to wait for permission to reclaim my dignity. Thanksgiving had taught me where I stood. Christmas had shown me how little that mattered to them. And now in the quiet of my own home, I understood something with absolute clarity. If I stayed, this would be my life. Standing, waiting, explaining. And I was done. The next chapter of my life wouldn't begin with a fight. It would begin with a choice. And this time I would make it for myself. I didn't tell Daniel right away. Not because I was afraid of his reaction, but because I wanted to be certain that the decision I was making belonged entirely to me. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. The next morning, I woke up before him. The apartment was still dark quiet in that early hour when the world hasn't made any demands yet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same table where we'd had so many half-finished conversations, and opened my notebook. I read everything I'd written since Thanksgiving. Not to relive the pain, but to trace the pattern. Every entry carried the same themes: silence rewarded, resistance punished, respect conditional, love transactional. By the time Daniel woke up, I had reached a clarity that felt almost frightening in its calm. He came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. You're up early. I didn't sleep much, I said. He nodded as if that explained everything. We sat across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I talked to my mom again last night." I didn't ask what she said. "She's worried you're isolating me," he continued. "She thinks you're trying to turn this into some kind of power struggle." I folded my hands on the table. "Do you think that—" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "I think," he said carefully, "you're asking me to choose between you and my family." I looked at him steadily. "I'm asking you to choose how your wife is treated." "That's not the same thing," he replied. "To you," I said quietly, "because you're not the one being diminished." His jaw tightened. "So what, you want me to confront my mother, embarrass her after everything she's done for me?" I felt something loosen inside my chest, not break, release. "This is what I mean," I said. "You hear disrespect toward me as loyalty toward her." He leaned back in his chair. "I can't rewrite my entire family dynamic for you." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "I'm asking you to stop expecting me to suffer quietly inside it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You've changed." "Yes," I agreed, because I had to. The conversation stalled there, circling the same ground we'd been standing on for weeks. Eventually, he stood up and said he needed air. He left without slamming the door, which somehow felt worse. I spent the rest of the day alone. I didn't distract myself. I didn't clean. I didn't scroll mindlessly. I sat with the truth of my situation, letting it settle fully into my body. That night, I called my sister. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the chair, the silence, Daniel's refusal to intervene. When I finished, she didn't rush to reassure me. She said something simple. "You know this isn't about holidays anymore." "I do," I replied. "And you know this doesn't get better unless he fundamentally changes," she continued. "I know. And has he shown you any sign that he will?" I closed my eyes. "No." There was a pause. "Then what do you want?" The same question Daniel had asked, but this time it felt real. "I want to be treated like I matter," I said. "You already have your answer," she replied gently. I slept deeply that night. The next morning I packed a small bag. Not dramatically, not angrily, just enough for a few days. Clothes, my laptop, the notebook, things that belonged to me alone. When Daniel came home that evening and saw the bag by the door, his face tightened. "What's this?" he asked. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a bit," I said. He scoffed. "So, this is your solution?" "Running away." "No," I replied. "This is me stepping out of a situation where I'm not respected." "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "I'm finally seeing it in proportion," I answered. He crossed his arms. "And what are you expecting? That I'll come crawling after you?" I met his eyes. "I'm not expecting anything from you right now." That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "You can't just leave," he said. "We're married." "Yes," I replied. "And marriage shouldn't require me to accept humiliation to survive it." He didn't try to stop me when I picked up the bag. He followed me to the door, his expression torn between irritation and disbelief. "This isn't how adults handle conflict," he said. "Neither is ignoring it until someone disappears," I replied. I walked out without another word. At my sister's place, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not joy, not happiness, just the absence of constant tension. Over the next few days, Daniel texted sporadically, questions disguised as concern, statements framed as confusion. I answered when necessary, briefly, clearly. Then a message from his mother appeared on my phone. "You're tearing this family apart." I stared at the screen, then deleted the message without responding. For the first time, her words didn't land. They had no authority here. A week later, Daniel called. "I don't know what you want from me anymore," he said. I took a breath. "I want a partner who will not allow me to be treated like staff in his family." Silence. "That's unrealistic," he said finally. That was it. The sentence was quiet, almost reasonable, and completely final. I hung up and sat very still. In that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. He wasn't confused. He wasn't torn. He wasn't struggling. He was choosing the path that required the least disruption to his world. And that path did not include me as an equal. That night, I wrote one final line in my notebook. "I am done waiting for permission to exist fully." The next chapter wouldn't be about convincing anyone. It would be about acting on the truth I could no longer ignore. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that would cost. I was afraid of what staying would take. Living at my sister's place felt temporary in the way hotel rooms do. Safe, clean, quiet, but not mine. Still, it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Perspective. The first few days passed slowly. I worked remotely from her dining table, answered emails, nodded through meetings. On the surface, my life looked unchanged. Inside, everything was rearranging itself. Daniel didn't show up. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask what it would take to fix things. Instead, he sent messages like, "I don't understand why you're doing this. You're making things harder than they need to be. My mom is devastated." Never once, "Are you okay? I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I should have spoken up." That absence spoke louder than anything he could have said. A week after I left, he finally asked to meet. "Just to talk," he said. "Neutral ground." We met at a quiet cafe halfway between my sister's apartment and our place. He arrived first, already seated, hands wrapped around a coffee he hadn't touched. "You look tired," I said, sitting down. "So do you," he replied. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of other conversations filling the space between us. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally. I looked at him carefully. "Then why are you so comfortable letting me be hurt?" He frowned. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I said. He leaned forward. "I'm asking you to be patient. My family is complicated." "So am I replied. "Why am I the only one expected to adapt?" He rubbed his forehead. "Because you're stronger." That sentence made something inside me go cold. "I'm not stronger," I said quietly. "I've just been quieter." He sighed. "What do you want me to do? Cut my mother off?" "I want you to tell her that I am your wife," I said. "That I will not be disrespected. That I will not be treated like hired help. And if she can't accept that, then you will leave the room with me." He stared at his coffee. "That would cause a huge conflict," he said. "Yes," I replied, "and avoiding that conflict is what caused this one." He shook his head. "You're asking me to change who I am." I nodded. "And you've been asking me to disappear." That was the moment his face changed. Not anger, not sadness, resignation. "I don't think I can do that," he said. There it was. Clear, simple, honest. I felt something loosen in my chest, a painful but necessary release. "Thank you for finally telling the truth," I said. He looked up sharply. "So that's it?" "That's it," I replied. I stood, placed a few bills on the table, and picked up my coat. "You're really walking away," he said. "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I walked away weeks ago. This is just catching up." He didn't follow me out. Back at my sister's apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it fully for the first time. Grief. Not for the man he was now, but for the marriage I thought I had. For the future I kept trying to earn. For the version of myself who believed patience would eventually be rewarded. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief. Because I finally knew the cost of peace in that marriage. It would have required my silence, my compliance, my disappearance, and I was no longer willing to pay that price. That night I emailed a lawyer. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just a simple request for a consultation. I wasn't ready to file yet, but I was ready to understand my options. When I closed my laptop, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't scared. The fear had lived in the waiting, in the hoping, in the constant negotiation of my worth. Now that the truth was spoken, there was nothing left to manage. The next morning, Daniel sent one last message. "I think you're making a mistake." I read it, then typed back. I think I stopped making them. I didn't block him. I didn't lash out. I didn't explain. I simply went on with my day. That was the real shift. I wasn't trying to be understood anymore. I was choosing myself without asking anyone else to agree. And somewhere deep down, I knew this story was no longer just about a chair at a Thanksgiving table. It was about a life that had asked me to shrink to survive. And my refusal to do that ever again. The next chapter wouldn't be about loss. It would be about what happens when a woman finally stands up and doesn't sit back down. The lawyer's office was quieter than I imagined. No dramatic tension, no raised voices, just neutral walls, soft lighting, and a woman across the desk who looked at me without judgment as I told my story from the beginning. Thanksgiving, the chair, Christmas, the silence, Daniel's refusal to intervene. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she folded her hands. "This isn't just a marital conflict," she said. "It's a pattern of coercion through family hierarchy." Hearing it named did something to me. "I'm not crazy," I said softly. "No," she replied. "You're responding to sustained disrespect." She asked practical questions next. Assets, accounts, the lease on our apartment. I answered calmly, surprised by how grounded I felt discussing things I once avoided because they felt too final. "There's something else," she said carefully. "Based on what you've told me, your mother-in-law may have been exerting influence over your marriage in ways that matter legally." I frowned. "Like what?" "Control," she said, "and possibly financial pressure." I blinked. "Financial. Did she ever contribute to your household?" she asked. "Yes," I said slowly. "She helped Daniel with a down payment before we were married." "And was that ever brought up during conflicts?" she asked. I thought back. Every argument about boundaries eventually circled back to the same phrase. "After everything she's done for us." "Yes," I said, "all the time." The lawyer nodded. "That matters." On my way home, her words echoed in my mind. That matters. For years, I had felt indebted without fully understanding why. Guilty for setting limits, afraid of being labeled ungrateful. I had assumed that was emotional. It wasn't. It was leverage. That night, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to listen. I talked to my mom, he said. She thinks you're being influenced by people who don't understand our family. I smiled sadly. I'm finally being influenced by myself. She's worried you'll make decisions you can't take back, he continued. I took a breath. I already made one. He was quiet. What? I chose not to live like this anymore, I said. You're throwing everything away, he said, frustration rising. Our marriage, our future. Our future was built on my silence, I replied. That's not something I can mourn. He exhaled sharply. So what now? I'm meeting with a lawyer, I said. There it was. The pause, the shift. You're serious, he said. Yes. This is exactly what my mom warned me about, he snapped. I didn't react. Your mom has been warning you about me since I started speaking. Silence again. Then quietly, she thinks you planned this. I almost laughed. I planned to survive. He hung up shortly after. The next few weeks unfolded with an odd mix of calm and revelation. Daniel moved his things out of the apartment. Not all at once, gradually, as if hoping I'd change my mind if he didn't make it too real. I didn't stop him. I didn't help either. One afternoon while sorting paperwork, I found something unexpected. An old email chain between Daniel and his mother. I hadn't been looking for it. It was saved in a shared folder we rarely used. The subject line caught my eye. Handling her. My hands went cold as I opened it. The messages were months old, long before Thanksgiving. She's getting too comfortable. You need to remind her how things work in this family. Don't let her think she has equal say yet. I read every word slowly, carefully, my chest tightening with each line. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was orchestration. When I met with my lawyer again, I brought the emails. She read them once, then again. This changes things, she said. How I asked. It confirms intent, she replied, and influence. I didn't know how far I wanted to take this yet. Divorce was already enough. But knowing the truth mattered. Seeing the structure behind the behavior mattered. Because it meant my pain wasn't imagined. It was designed. That evening, I sat alone and thought about the woman I had been when I married Daniel. Hopeful, flexible, eager to belong. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had planned for me to shrink. And when I refused, the system turned against me. Daniel texted later that night. My mom says if you apologize, we can still fix this. I typed back slowly. There is nothing left to fix, only things to end. He didn't reply. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something close to peace. Not because things were resolved, but because they were finally clear. The next chapter wouldn't be about convincing anyone of my worth. It would be about reclaiming it fully. And the people who mistook my silence for consent were about to learn what happens when the truth is no longer hidden behind politeness. I didn't confront Daniel right away. Not because I was afraid of him and not because I was unsure of what I'd found. I waited because for the first time I understood something crucial. Power doesn't always need confrontation. Sometimes it needs timing. The emails sat in my bag for 3 days before I showed them to anyone else. During that time, Daniel grew restless. He texted more often, asked vague questions, sent messages that sounded like concern but felt like control trying to reassert itself. Are you okay? We should talk soon. This is getting out of hand. Out of whose hands, I wondered. On the 4th day, his mother called me directly. I hadn't blocked her, not out of kindness, but because I wanted to hear what she would say now that I was no longer playing my role. Her voice was calm, warm even. I think we've had some misunderstandings, she began. Families go through adjustments. I didn't interrupt. You're very emotional, she continued gently, and that makes things look worse than they are. There it was again. Minimization disguised as care. I've seen the emails, I said. The silence on the line was immediate and absolute. What emails, she asked, to beat too late. The ones where you discussed managing me, I replied. Before Thanksgiving, before Christmas. Her tone changed instantly, sharper, controlled. You shouldn't be snooping, she said. I wasn't, I replied. They were saved in a shared folder. Another pause. You're twisting things, she said. Those were private conversations between a mother and her son. They were about my behavior, I replied, and my position. She exhaled slowly. You're trying to break this family apart. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. No, I'm refusing to be broken by it. She hung up without another word. That night, Daniel came to my sister's apartment unannounced. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, something in me stayed calm. Not guarded, just settled. We need to talk, he said. I agree, I replied, stepping aside. He sat across from me at the table, his posture tense. My mom said you accused her of manipulating things. I didn't accuse, I said. I read. He frowned. Read what? I slid the printed emails across the table. He didn't touch them at first. Then he did. His face changed as he read. Confusion, then discomfort, then something closer to recognition. She was just trying to help, he said weakly. She was planning, I replied, and you were participating. He looked up. I didn't think it was that serious. That's the problem, I said. You never do. He leaned back, rubbing his face. She was worried you'd change me. I did, I said calmly. I showed you what respect looks like. His voice rose. You're turning this into something ugly. It was already ugly, I replied. You just didn't want to see it. He stood abruptly. So what, you're going to use this against us? Against you, I corrected. No. Then what, he demanded. I'm going to tell the truth, I said, without cushioning it. He stared at me. To who? I met his eyes. To myself, to my lawyer, and if necessary to anyone who asks why this marriage ended. His shoulders dropped slightly. You want to destroy my family. I shook my head. I want my life back. He didn't stay long after that. The next morning I filed for separation. Not because of the emails alone, but because they confirmed what I had already lived. The Thanksgiving chair hadn't been a mistake. Christmas hadn't been miscommunication. Daniel's silence hadn't been neutrality. It had all been intentional. When my lawyer submitted the paperwork, she looked at me carefully. Are you ready for this to get harder before it gets easier? Yes, I said, because I already lived through the hardest part. That afternoon, messages started circulating. Friends of the family, distant relatives, people who had never checked in before. What happened? This doesn't sound like you. Families are complicated. I didn't respond. For the first time, I wasn't interested in managing perception. That evening, alone in my sister's guest room, I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how close I had come to believing I was the problem. How easily I could have accepted that chair. How quietly I might have stood for years. How much of myself I would have lost in exchange for approval that was never meant for me. Instead, I had chosen disruption. And disruption, I was learning, is often the first step toward truth. The next chapter wouldn't be about endings anymore. It would be about consequences. And the people who believed I would stay silent were about to discover what happens when the story finally belongs to the person who lived it. The backlash didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments through side doors and polite messages, the way pressure always does when it wants to look reasonable. The first call came from Daniel's aunt, the one who liked to describe herself as neutral. I just want to understand, she said carefully. This feels extreme. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply said, it only feels extreme if you didn't live it. She didn't call again. Then came the emails. Not angry, concerned. Each one framed the same way. Families aren't perfect. Marriage takes compromise. You'll regret making this public. Public. That word amused me more than it should have. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't shared screenshots. I hadn't told my side loudly or dramatically. All I had done was stop lying for their comfort. And that alone was enough to rattle them. Daniel's lawyer contacted mine a week after the separation filing. The tone was formal, restrained. He wanted mediation, not reconciliation. Control. My lawyer laid out the terms calmly. Asset division, timelines, boundaries, no direct contact unless necessary. Daniel objected to one thing. He wanted the emails excluded. They're private family correspondence, his lawyer argued. My lawyer didn't even blink. They establish influence and intent. That phrase again. Intent. The word that turned Thanksgiving from an awkward holiday into evidence of a pattern. Daniel called me that night, his voice tight. You're really going to let this get ugly? He asked. I didn't make it ugly, I replied. I stopped cleaning it up. He exhaled sharply. You know my mother is beside herself. I know, I said. She's used to being obeyed. Silence. She says you're doing this to punish her, he said. I'm doing this to protect myself, I replied. What she feels about that is not my responsibility. He lowered his voice. If you back off, we can keep this civil. It is civil, I said. It's just not controlled by you anymore. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, communication became procedural. Emails through lawyers, short responses, no emotion allowed through official channels. And something unexpected happened. The power shifted. Without my silence smoothing things over, cracks appeared everywhere. Family members disagreed openly. Stories didn't line up. Daniel's mother tried to manage the narrative, but without access to me, she had no one left to correct, no one left to reposition. I wasn't there to absorb the tension anymore. That vacuum changed everything. During mediation, Daniel looked smaller than I remembered, less certain. His confidence had always relied on consensus, on being backed quietly by a system that never questioned him. Now that system was exposed. When the mediator asked about Thanksgiving, Daniel tried to minimize it again. It was a misunderstanding, he said. She's sensitive. The mediator turned to me. Was it a misunderstanding? No, I replied evenly. It was consistent with how I'd been treated for years. She nodded and wrote something down. That was it. No argument, no debate, just acknowledgement. The settlement didn't take long after that. Daniel agreed to terms he would have fought months earlier. He avoided extended hearings. He didn't push for character statements. He didn't try to drag me through explanations. He wanted it finished. Because the longer it went on, the clearer the truth became. On the day the papers were finalized, I felt nothing dramatic. No rush of relief, no grief surge, just a quiet sense of completion. I wasn't losing a marriage. I was leaving a structure that had never made room for me. Daniel sent one final message after everything was signed. I hope one day you see this differently. I read it once, then deleted it. I already saw it clearly. That night, sitting alone, I thought about the woman I had been standing behind that Thanksgiving table, holding a pitcher of water, waiting for permission to sit. She hadn't been weak. She had been trained. And training can be unlearned. The story didn't end with revenge, or vindication, or anyone falling apart publicly. It ended with something quieter. The removal of access to my labor, access to my patience, access to my silence. The people who benefited most from those things felt the loss immediately. I felt freedom. The final chapter wasn't going to be about what they lost. It was going to be about what I rebuilt. And for the first time, I knew exactly where I would place my chair. I moved into my own apartment at the beginning of spring, not because I was starting over, but because I was finally starting from myself. The place was small compared to the home Daniel and I once shared. One bedroom, one balcony, light that poured in every afternoon like it had been waiting for me. I furnished it slowly, deliberately. A chair by the window, a table I could eat at alone or with people who saw me. Nothing excessive, nothing inherited from anyone else's expectations. On the first night there, I cooked a simple meal and sat down to eat. I noticed it immediately. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wait. I didn't scan the room to see if I was allowed. I just sat. That realization hit me harder than any courtroom moment or confrontation ever had. For years, I had been negotiating my right to take up space, asking without words, earning without acknowledgement, standing quietly believing that if I proved myself long enough, someone would eventually offer me a chair. They never planned to. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Daniel's mother. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity won. I hope you're happy. Families don't survive when people refuse to compromise. I read it once, then set the phone down. For the first time, her words didn't feel heavy. They felt small, limited by the same thinking that had built a hierarchy and called it love. I didn't respond. Happiness, I was learning, didn't come from winning arguments or proving anyone wrong. It came from no longer being available for roles that required my disappearance. Over time, the noise faded. The extended family stopped asking questions. Friends stopped offering advice. Daniel became someone I used to know. His mother became a voice that no longer reached me. What remained was quiet, not loneliness, alignment. I began noticing how differently I moved through the world now, how I spoke more directly, how I paused before agreeing, how I trusted the first moment of discomfort instead of dismissing it. One afternoon, a coworker invited me to dinner with her family. When I arrived, she pulled out a chair beside her and said, "Sit here." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was healing. I thought back to that Thanksgiving table, the 11 chairs, the instruction to stand, the silence that followed. That moment had felt like an ending. It wasn't. It was an invitation. An invitation to stop waiting for inclusion in places built on exclusion. An invitation to stop mistaking endurance for love. An invitation to choose myself without apology. If you're hearing this story and something in it feels familiar, hear this clearly. You don't have to earn your place. You don't have to perform for respect. You don't have to stand quietly to keep the peace. Any table that requires your humiliation is not a table meant for you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave it entirely and build your own. I didn't destroy a family. I didn't betray a marriage. I didn't overreact to a holiday dinner. I responded to the truth of how I was treated. And I chose to sit where my presence was not conditional. That choice changed everything. This is where my story ends. Not with forgiveness, not with revenge, but with clarity. And a chair that was always meant for me.